Hi, I'm Jim Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. Well, as most of you know, Washington, D.C. was hit with a major snow system that brought in record-breaking snow, paralyzing much of the city. I'm grateful to my guest, Mowahid for braving the storm today to join me here in the studio for a conversation on a range of topics. Mowahid is former Pakistan cabinet minister for Punjabi affairs, served as an advisor to former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Chaudhry Hussein, and he's a 30-year friend of mine, and I thank you very much for coming out today. The snow was really incredible.
Amazing. It shows actually the might of nature, and it shows also the limitations of man.
And it also brought out a kind of a sense of community in the city that is very rare here,
yes, exactly.
You know, and people walking in the neighborhoods and kind of enjoying each other, neighbors meeting each other, actually. A city, I say, where every person almost feels like they're the center of the universe. A crisis of this sort of changes the character, at least for the short term.
I think adversity has that impact of bringing in more kinship.
Yeah, and I think, too, the quieting down of the city was interesting. Somebody commented today that while the Congress was closed, it actually didn't make a whole lot of difference because not a whole lot is happening there anyway. I mean, the gridlock in Congress was now sort of augmented by the gridlock in the city. Things just weren't moving. It's kind of opening up again now, but thanks for making it down here to do this. I wanted to start with an event that took place over the weekend in a part of the country where there wasn't a whole lot of snow, and that was this Tea Party convention. It's not an issue you and I have talked about before, but because it happened, I wanted to put it up and get viewers to call in and talk about it. Two particular speakers annoyed me, and I wanted to just show what they said and then talk about it a little bit. First, Sarah Palin, who made a rather brazen set of comments about President Obama and Iran. I want to put them up for the viewers to look at if they hadn't already seen them, and if it doesn't irritate you too much to have to look at them again if you've already seen them. But it was rather striking, and it touched on a topic that we've talked about on this show, so I thought it would be interesting to look at it and then get your calls and comments. Here's Sarah Palin.
I know that 3 years is an eternity in politics, but how hard do you think President Obama will be to defeat in 2012?
It depends on a few things. Say he played, and I got this from Buchanan reading one of his columns the other day, say he played the war card. Say he decided to declare war on Iran or decided to really come out and do whatever he could to support Israel, which I would like him to do. But that changes the dynamics in what we can assume is going to happen between now and 3 years. Because I think if the election were today, I do not think Obama would be reelected. But 3 years from now, things could change if on the national security front.
But you're not suggesting that he would cynically play the war card.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying if he did, things would dramatically change if he decided to toughen up and do all that he can to secure our nation and our allies. I think people would perhaps shift their thinking a little bit and decide, well, maybe he's tougher than we think than he is today, and there wouldn't be as much passion to make sure that he doesn't serve another 4 years.
Well, a couple things about that interview that followed her speech at the Tea Party convention. The one is actually one person noted, I saw that the pin she had on was an American flag, Israel flag crossed pin. The comment about Israel, sure, but the article that she's quoting was not from Pat Buchanan, it was from Daniel Pipes. A rather brazen statement to make, that if he were to bomb Iran, people would say he's tough enough and let him, as she put it, serve another term. What do people make of that when they see that kind of rhetoric overseas?
I think it reflects very seriously on the lack of political immaturity in the American political system, and also a kind of a hidden political corruption which is not often discussed. Here we have someone who is palpably unqualified, who is semi-literate, and talking about opening a third front while America is mired in Iraq, while America is mired in Afghanistan. And basically it's a prescription for apocalypse to open a front with Iran. And then making the connection that if he does bomb Iran, as suggested by Dan Pipes, it would basically ensure his election, which meant that he would then cater to a particular vested group within America, which is pushing for war with Iran. And that group is basically doing things which are at variance with broader American interests. So this, I think, is a sad reflection on America that someone like Palin would get this mileage. But also, I think most importantly, it shows basically that, as Napoleon said, when Napoleon was asked this question, that why were you able to defeat the Bourbons? He said they learned nothing and they forgot nothing. So I think it shows the lack of shame, the lack of common human decency, that after what the mistakes of Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld have done to the average Americans. I had the occasion to visit Section 60 in the Arlington Cemetery about a few weeks ago. And I saw so many distraught widows and sisters and parents crying over the graves of their sons who were sent needlessly to battle, while Bush and Cheney, who basically avoided war, were basically armchair warriors. And here this is a continuation of the same old thing, which means that basically people who matter at the particular level have learned nothing. And that is why I think one of the reasons is that America has now suffering tremendously. It has lost leverage to a great extent. It has lost influence. And I think only that slide has been arrested by someone like Obama. Just make a notice of this, Jim, that over a year ago, when Bush was in Iraq, what happened to him? A shoe was thrown at his face, the ultimate insult. And Obama, when he was, I think, decorated with the Nobel Peace Prize, there was a huge hue and cry within America, not elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Although it was a great honor that he maybe didn't deserve it. Well, one question should be asked, did Begin deserve it? When Begin got it, did Kissinger deserve it? So this is an honor. So I think there's a backlash somehow against Obama.
Let me get callers in. If you want to give us a call and talk about this, please do. If you're overseas, 001-202-842-5056. Here in the U.S., 1-800-528-2090. Tonight we're going to feature your comments as well on this show. We want to get as many of you in as we possibly can. The nothing learned part. What's troubling is not that you've got a Sarah Palin saying this or a Daniel Pipes writing it, but that you've got a movement of people who support her in this regard, and that the American people, or a portion of them, at least enough of them, to weigh heavily on our politics, are there, almost impervious to the lessons that could and should be learned from all of this. What kind of message does it send to people overseas listening to that? Do they look at it and just blow it off and dismiss it, or does it concern them?
I think people abroad, they are less shackled by Western interests, and they see it more clearly. They see it as a backlash against someone who was a son of a foreign student, who had a multicultural background, who had a Muslim father, a Muslim stepfather, and who now represents a party which is becoming increasingly brown. And I think this is an elephant in the room. The Republican Party is becoming increasingly Caucasian. And there's a clear-cut backlash. I saw a program, and rather I heard this program called Opposing Obama, which was conducted by BBC, a series of interviews. It was a remarkable program. And they said very clearly, the people who went there, that we are basically opposing Obama because, first of all, he's not a Christian, and he's a Muslim, and he's not American, and he's a Bolshevik, and that's why we are opposing it. And he's not white. So these are the things which are coming out, I think.
36% of Republicans in a recent poll still think he's not born in the United States.
Neither was McCain. That was not made into an issue. McCain was born in Panama.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting how the focus is so selective.
Let me put another person up who spoke at this convention, indicative of the kind of mindset, again, of this movement, and that's Tom Tancredo. Tom Tancredo, who will be known in the Muslim world for the person who said, if there's another attack, we should bomb the Holy Mosque in Mecca, and that created a big outburst. I debated him on CNN, and he was steadfast in his view. It was a pretty testy debate that he and I had, but it was worth having. Here's Tom Tancredo. He's speaking at the the Tea Party convention. This is former congressman from Colorado and a presidential candidate. Didn't do so well, but does seem to have found his element at this convention. Here's Tom Tancredo.
Something really odd happened. Mostly because I think we do not have a civics literacy test before people can vote in this country. People who could not even spell the word vote or say it in English put a committed socialist ideologue in the White House. Name is Barack Hussein Obama.
Anti-immigrant, racist, and anti-Muslim. I mean, and yet that's the crowd that is today being looked at as sort of carrying the torch of republicanism.
This is the same crowd when the European Jewry was facing extinction, kept quiet. This is the same crowd when the ship St. Louis, full of German Jewish refugees, had seen the lights of Miami, was on the verge of disembarking at Miami, was turned back by no other person than Franklin Roosevelt, because these people had no clout, no leverage. There's this very sordid tendency in the human nature to prey on the powerless, to prey on somebody who doesn't have clout, to attack somebody who's weak. So when it mattered, I would like to ask this question basically overall to the international community. Look at the British royalty. Much of the British royalty was sympathetic to Nazism. Even the King Edward VIII, who had resigned, was a great supporter of Nazism. It was only Churchill who stood up to him. Even within America, there were people like Henry Ford, who was known for his anti-Semitic views. So my point, if you even look at the New York Times, I saw a very interesting study that when the Holocaust was taking place, it was hardly even mentioned or referred in the New York Times when the event happened. So the question is, when it mattered, the European Jewry had no supporters, had no friends. But now, when the tables have been turned, now everybody wants to cater to it. So this is very unfortunate. But what happens is that look at the cost to America. America has lost so much in Iraq, has lost so much in Afghanistan, and now there's a tendency to open a new front against Iran, and nobody wants to discuss what is the root cause.
What's intriguing to me about all this is that we live in a global era where some imam someplace will say some horrible thing, and the Western press will be filled with diatribe against the person for saying it, which he should be condemned for saying it. Calls will be made to the governments in those countries to crack down on said person. And yet we have this kind of rhetoric here that is becoming more, not quite mainstream, but mainstream enough that a former vice presidential candidate who is today in the lead among Republican candidates, Sarah Palin, and Tom Tancredo, a former congressman who is still has a political following, articulate those views and do so without criticism.
The reason is that I think this is a failure of the Arab community overall and the Muslim community. If you look at America, there are nearly over 7 million Muslims, as Obama said during his landmark speech at Cairo. But where it matters, in the policy-making arenas, in the profession of law, in the profession of journalism, in the profession of media, and the movie making, is absence there. That's one thing. Abroad, you look at it, you look at the United Nations, there's only one organ which is effective, the UN Security Council. There's not even a single Muslim country with the power to have a veto. That's another thing. Thirdly, there's no such equivalence of, I think, a Muslim NATO. I think where the Muslim world and the Arab world has failed is that they have not converted their resources, their wealth, into vision and into basically focusing into subsidizing think tanks and basically pursuing knowledge. That was the strength of traditional Islam, and that strength has been dissipated into corrupt futility by the failure of the venal and inept elites. I think that's where I think there needs to be a searching self-examination why this is occurring.
Let's go to California for a call. Caller, your view on this.
Yes, sir. Here's my question. Getting back to everything you say, and I agree with both of you, but isn't it the fact that a lack of public financing in our national elections leads to special interest groups which run this country, so therefore you get people like AIPAC, and therefore the third thing is you get buffoons like Sarah Palin that play up to them, and that's basically what it is. So up until the point...
Let me ask you something.
Yes.
Sarah Palin right now is being funded, but she's being funded by folks who want to hear her. What troubles me is not so much special interests who fund, but a reservoir of opinion that finds a Sarah Palin and a Tom Tancredo attractive. In other words, you can be a demagogue with no funding, and if you've got an audience that wants to follow you, which is what these folks have, then you have political power. And yeah, then the lobbies come in and they can do the additional funding on top of it. But what bothers me is that you get this woman from Wasilla and this congressman from Colorado who, there's not a question of funding here, there's a question of folks who want to hear their hate speech. That to me is the danger. Comment on that if you would.
Yes, I would. Okay, well that falls into stuff like Fox, that falls into stuff like Rush Limbaugh, that plays on the frustrations of the American people. They don't hold, and I still think it comes back to special interest groups, because what we're doing, we're not getting quality people to run for national office. Yeah. So you end up with people like Sarah Palin who says stuff like, "I can see Russia from my bedroom." Yeah. And they don't ridicule her for saying stuff like that. Who writes stuff on her right hand, and they don't. But I still think, and I'm a big fan of yours as well as Noam Chomsky. I read all that stuff, but I just think that he thinks it's because, and I guess he makes a good point, that big business runs this country, and they like Israel because they can keep the Arabs in line by putting their foot on their neck, if I can borrow a quote from him, to protect America's oil interests, so we can control the world.
Well, let me go to a caller from Oregon. Caller, your view on this. Hello.
Hello.
Yes. Hi. Your observation.
Yeah. What I'd like to talk to the gentleman about is Wahhabism in Pakistan.
Yeah.
How does the Pakistani people view that, being though it comes out of Egypt, and are they wanting to go that way?
Well, number one, Wahhabism comes out of Saudi Arabia, but is a much misunderstood phenomenon. But anyway, let me, without that little bit of history lesson or geography lesson, let me just turn to Mowahid and say what he's referring to is a more fundamental view of Islam. Where does the Pakistani populace fall right now with regard to its approach to Islam in terms of percentages, if you can break it out?
Pakistan traditionally has been a very pluralistic and tolerant culture where the Shias and Sunnis have been living in relative harmony. In fact, the founding father of Pakistan was from a Shia faith, Muhammad Ali Jinnah Qadi-Azam. What happened was during the Soviet invasion, and this is where I think there has to be some elements of self-examination, self-accountability, that United States did encourage this so-called jihad against the Soviets. And one of the instruments was Saudi Arabia. And Pakistan also provided help. So I think this three forces, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and United States at the behest, they did encourage this. So what is happening in Afghanistan right now, they are reaping what has been sowed. And only yesterday, I think Charlie Wilson died. Yeah. And he was considered as one of the heroes and architects of supporting the Afghan Mujahideen. But what is not adequately examined was that nobody thought about the repercussions and what would happen in its aftermath, And now you have zealotry, you have now extremism, you have militancy, you have murderous gangs, and this is compounded, I think, basically by ineffective ruling elites.
I thought about that with Charlie Wilson yesterday when they were talking about him as a hero, and the unintended consequences of his act are still with us today. We're going to come back in a minute and talk more about Pakistan, a little bit about Iran, and a few other areas of the world. We'll get off the Tea Party, and we'll take more of your calls after a break. Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm Jim Zogby, continuing our discussion with columnist and political analyst and former minister Mowahid Hussein Shah. I want to shift gears, if we could, and go to Pakistan and talk about that a little bit. There's continuing reports about the successor to the Taliban in Pakistan having been killed, and then denial that he's been killed, and affirmation that he's been killed, and then denial again. The first is, who do we believe in this? And secondly, does it matter?
I think that, first of all, I think that more or less it's confirmed that he expired. Yeah. I think it will matter if there is also a coherent U.S. policy. I find some flaws in U.S. policies in the region. Number one, there's an over-frequency of visits. Constantly, sometimes General Jones is going there. Sometimes, very frequently, Gates is going there. Hillary was recently back. First of all, I think it breeds familiarity. There's nothing new to say. So there's constantly visiting Pakistan. Secondly, there's a tendency of making public demands. When you make public demands, which I think should be made privately, you set the stage for a public rebuff. That has also happened because America wanted Pakistan to take a more assertive action in North Waziristan, which Pakistan basically rightfully said they don't have that capacity right now. Their hands are tied to go for it after their successes in South Waziristan. Thirdly, I think trying to bring in India into the picture, because that's a very major Pakistani sensitivity. They do not wish to be sandwiched between India and a pro-India Afghanistan. And that was a mistake made by Bush and Condi Rice, that while talking of proliferation against Iran, they conducted, I think, a legally dubious nuclear deal with India, which was at variance with applicable international laws. Mm-hmm. So they are serious, I think. Fourthly, I think most importantly, the American policymakers, because of the flaws in the system, although they're eager to point fingers at others to do more, they're unwilling to re-examine their flaws in dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which I think is the real cause of militancy, like a volcano from where I think the lava of militancy bubbles. If America wishes to curb militancy, it doesn't need to fight all these wars. It just needs to review its policies and try to, not to do favors to the Palestinians, just be fair to bring fairness to the Palestinians.
On the issue, though, of the Taliban in Pakistan, is it defeatable?
I think most of the people in Pakistan do not want another segment of a religious police telling them what to do or what not to do. Okay. It has been basically a reaction against what has been happening in Afghanistan and American misguided policies. I feel that most people in Pakistan reject what they feel as murderous attempts by a few groups to impose their basically version of how the country should be run. So I feel it's completely defeatable, but it can only be defeatable if you have honest governing elites in Pakistan, and if you see the West as an honest broker. You can't have a West, like for example, NATO has a Secretary General, Rasmussen, who was a Danish Prime Minister when this tragic cartoon controversy erupted in Denmark in February 2005. So you can't basically disrespect Islam and then show that we need Muslim allies. So there's a lot of contradiction. See, there has to be a choice made. Pakistan has to be seen and shown as an ally, not as a target. So there's a tremendous amount of ambivalence how Pakistan is being treated, how the Muslim world is being treated. You can't insult the Muslims and then expect them to be your allies.
One more question on this, and that is the drone strikes. It's going to become a passion of mine, the legality of this issue, which amounts to something akin to extrajudicial killings. Does Pakistan authorize the use of these? Do they accept these? Or I hear them complain about them, but nevertheless they continue. Is this a violation of sovereignty?
It is, I think, assassination, whether one likes it or it's a very clear-cut assassination. And it's leading to lots and lots of innocent deaths of civilians. and it is causing enormous amount of consternation in Pakistan and creating a lot of ill will against America. I think that this whole concept of drone assassinations through remote methods needs to be rethought, re-examined, because it is not working. It is helping create more enemies for America than allies.
Let's take a call. We've got Illinois up first. Caller?
Yeah, hello.
How are you?
How are you? I would like to say, is Pakistan still corrupt? How do you guys see Pakistan in your point of view?
Thank you. Corruption in Pakistan.
It's as corrupt as America is corrupt. How many people in America have the guts in the U.S. Congress or in the media to criticize Israel or to say that the root cause of militancy is U.S. support for Israel, which people like Carter have said that, which people like Brzezinski have said that. But how many people do that? Because they know they will be taken to the cleaners. So we have also the same kind of corruption in Pakistan in many respects, which needs to be, I think, taken care of. I think these are problems which need to be addressed honestly, and both sides, whether it's in the Muslim world or in the Western world, they are not looking inward. They are more interested in pointing fingers. And as Confucius, the great teacher, said 2,000 years ago, if you point one finger at someone, remember the three fingers are pointing at yourself. So I think most importantly, if one has to fight militancy, one has to reduce violence and zealotry, there is absolutely no substitute but to tackle the Middle East issue, of which the core issue is the Palestinian issue, head on. Otherwise, no resolution of the Middle East issue, no peace in the world. Simple as that.
Let's go to UK for a call. Caller? Hello?
Hi, I'm calling from London. I just had a few things. Now, the first of all is mention about the trust which we have to develop to gain for the Muslims. Now, you mentioned about the the cartoonist of Denmark, which created a big issue. Now, the other thing which you have discussed, the leader of Al-Qaeda. Now, American forces have the biggest implement in the whole part of Pakistan and Afghanistan using a drone, the eye, which is from the sky, to see everywhere, and they're attacking every single part where they can do in Pakistan. If they can't find it, and they are making a very solid allegation that, okay, we killed this part, we killed that part, but if they can't find themselves, so I think Pakistani government, they cannot do anything. The other part which I need to mention, which is just question asked by you to Mr. Minister, that how we can finish the Al-Qaeda leader, not Al-Qaeda you said leader. You cannot, it's easy to finish some leader, but it's harder to finish a whole, the tribe, which, the word I'm using, the tribe, because it's a developer tribe. You need to win someone to change. The last which I need to mention over here.
Give me a question. I'm going to ask you to come up with a question, though.
Yes, please.
Yes, give me a quick question.
Oh, you want the quick question?
Yeah.
The quick question is how we can finish the Al-Qaeda if this is the big thing, because everything is going against, us, because we want them to finish.
Okay.
We cannot finish them. We are fighting them, those people who have no shoes.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I was talking about what is called the Taliban in Pakistan, which is really quite different than the Taliban as they exist in Afghanistan. But on that question, Hillary Clinton said something quite interesting that caught a bit of flack in some circles. She said Iran is not the big threat, Al-Qaeda is the big threat. And there were some here who weren't really quite happy with that. They want to continue the Iran on the front burner thing. But Al-Qaeda has metastasized into...
Hillary Clinton also said something very interesting. Day before yesterday in the Washington Post was reported. Somebody was asking that how do we bring peace in the world? He said we have to go back to the 1967 borders in the Middle East. Yeah. She said that on the record. Yeah. Now, I think these things will remain. Like, there will be extremism, there will be bigotry, there will be ignorance, but these things can be reduced if there is good governance in the Muslim world, if people have a sense of fairness, people have a sense of fair representation. And in the Western world also, there is an adequate realization that you can't basically wage a war with bullets and bombs with the Muslim world. And because intrinsically there is no inherent conflict between the Muslim world and the West. Muslim world and the Western world, they have come from the same civilization in the Middle East. Christ was not born in London or Paris or in Washington. He was a Palestinian. So was Moses. He spent most of his life in Egypt. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was in Arabia. And St. Paul preached he didn't preach in Florence or he didn't preach in Venice. He preached in the street called Straight in Damascus. Santa Claus came from Turkey, St. Nicholas. So to say that there's a clash of civilization, us versus them, I think is intellectually fraudulent. And it really casts a very bad light, because within Islam there's a tremendous respect for Christianity and tolerance for other faiths. It recognizes Judaism, it recognizes the respect it has for the Virgin Mary and Prophet Christ is incredible. So, but because of the, I think, failures, intellectual failures of the Muslim world, and not basically reaching to world-class intellectual standards, that many of the attacks against Islam go unrebutted. And I think it's a high time that Muslims living in America go through a very serious soul searching. They've already proven that they can make their economic living. Now they have to make a point that they can also be pilots of their destiny in America. And that is so far not coming out very clearly. And they have a great opportunity in a man like Obama, who pledged in Cairo on June 4th. And it's very interesting why he picked the Cairo University. That's where Hassan bin Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, came from. Muhammad Atta, alleged architect of 9/11, came from. Nasser came from there. Sayyid Qutb, who basically inspires a lot of ideologues in that part of the world, came from Cairo. That's where Obama pledged that he is going to personally make it his fight to contest negative stereotyping. So this is the doors of opportunity which have been opened to the Muslims and Arabs, and that's, I think, where they have to make a difference, because America is a culture which will reward fairness and honesty, but that case has to be presented. You can't make a case sitting and lying on the couch.
Let's go to Florida for a call. Caller?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
How you doing, Jim?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you for asking. My comment is about that prejudiced man that make a comment about President Obama, that racist guy. I think the government here, the politicians, supposed to prevent such people to talk about other people, because he's no better than any other, religion or people. The second thing comment is about Sarah Palin. I think we should have some more brain than to elect somebody like Sarah Palin to be the leader of us as a president of the United States. I'm going a little bit quick. The other thing about the democracy and about the Arab regions, the United States have to have some clear policy there. For example, in Egypt, Mubarak, he's been in power for 30-something, years. The United States is okay because he support them. They want democracy in Palestine. Hamas win election, then they want against them and make sanction against them. In other countries, Taliban, for example, in Pakistan or in Afghanistan, what I'm saying is I think some other group of people here, they creating that monster of terrorism in the world just to wage war against other countries.
Well, thank you for that. I just want to shift for a moment, take a piece of that, and that's the Taliban in Afghanistan issue. We're not into the surge that Obama has committed himself to, but there are reports that the Taliban is actually strengthening its coalition on the ground. And there are these continued attacks on the U.S. military, in some instances, as there was one today, an individual in an Afghani uniform. Is there a danger in Afghanistan that we are training the very folks who will turn against us?
I think, first of all, there's a problem of somebody like Karzai, who's not respected, who won election through a tainted process. His brother was also implicated in wide-scale, I think, venal conduct, number one. Number two, I think most of the Taliban are Pashtun, which is a very important tribe which straddles Pakistan and Afghanistan. I think the danger to avoid is that it should not be seen as a war against the Pashtuns. That would be lethal. So far, the Afghan army and police is basically dysfunctional. They're barely literate. And some of them can't even, I was reading a report yesterday, they can't even read even the license plates of a car. They can't even operate a rifle. So this talk of having an Afghan partner and an Afghan our partner in the police and the army is basically pure mythology. The only real partners they have there in that part of the world is Pakistan. And to antagonize Pakistan would mean that there would be continuing impasse and deadlock in Afghanistan. So the key to American success in Afghanistan is to ensure that Pakistan remains on board and Pakistan is not antagonized through constant lecturing and at the same time trying to bring India into Afghanistan, because that will basically, I think, force Pakistan to take countermeasures.
Let's go to Algeria for a call. Caller? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, hi. Your question?
Hi. Yes, please. I'd like to ask you, I would like to focus on why America is always concentrating on countries who are Muslims, and about the war, why its reaction is not the same when Israel has attacked Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there an is there too much American focus now on conflict in the Muslim world?
Yes, there is, because I think for the failures of the Islamic Conference, failure of the Arab establishment, I think that the Arab establishment plays double game. Now, just what happened in Gaza was one of the greatest examples of war crimes, which has been corroborated in the report by Justice Goldstone. Amazingly, the report by Justice Goldstone, who himself is of Jewish background, has been roundly condemned by the US Congress without even reading it. Yeah. So this actually shows, I think, serious flaws. First of all, I think the Muslim establishment, particularly the Islamic Conference, should get its act together. Egypt had a key role in what happened in Gaza a year ago by facilitating the Israeli attack. And they have augmented that by now trying to build an underground steel barrier, which further suffocates, I think, the basic trade and commerce of essential commodities. So I really feel that the status quo is shattering, and American actions have been enabled by I think, ineffective Arab establishment and the Muslim governing elites, whose main concern is not providing a better life to their people, but staying on in power. Let's not forget, it was the Muslim establishment which facilitated the first Gulf War, and it facilitated the second Gulf War. And it acts in tandem. In effect, I think there's a triangle. United States, neocons, I think Arab establishment, and the State of Israel. On major issues, they have basically, in effect, there's been an informal nexus. And it has been to the detriment to the stability of the region and also of the world.
Let me go to one last call from New York in this segment. Caller, your observation.
Yes, gentlemen, I thank you for your time. I'm glad I had the opportunity to ask this question. Particularly, I wanted to follow up with regard to your earlier dialogue when you were discussing Sarah Palin and her approach and her rhetoric with regard to Iran. My question specifically to Mr. Shah would be, what do you believe, if anything, should be the proper course of conduct for the Obama administration? In other words, if he was possibly advising as to what he thought the best course of conduct would be, would that be specifically to pursue sanctions, or is there a broader recognition perhaps that there's a right of the state to pursue its own nuclear ambitions, irrespective of what another state may argue? And I'm curious if ultimately, if Mr. Shah, you believe that there is actually any possibility of an impasse short of violent conflict.
Thank you for that. We're going to handle this quickly because we want to take a break, but Iran, what would be the right course? I mean, we're going to talk about Iran in the next segment in terms of the demonstrations that have taken place and some of the repression. But Ahmadinejad came out with a rather, for his part, a brazen, we're going to do this. We're going to enrich to 20%. The issue is a bold challenge, almost inviting a response. What should be the response to that?
I think if Obama goes through the pursuit of sanctions, it will delegitimize the democratic opposition in Iran and inadvertently buttress Ahmadinejad. This is not what the Iranian people want. Secondly, let's not forget one thing. A lot of the talk in Iran about nuclear program is basically mostly bluster. The real reason Iran is being targeted is not because of its so-called nuclear capacity or its plans for weaponry, which are basically, I think, a lot of hot air, but for Iran's support of the Hezbollah and the Hamas. That's the real sources.
You might turn that upside down a little bit, because this guy has been, not the guy, but the regime from the beginning has been engaged in sort of exporting a revolution that has been destabilizing. And Hezbollah and Hamas and the support they give today is part of that, sort of its tendrils extending outward. People in the Arab world are concerned about Iran. I mean, some of the governments are concerned about what it represents and what danger it may pose even in Iraq. I mean, isn't it a bit upside down to say that it's being targeted for this when in fact it's encouraging that in order to pursue its goal?
Because when Iran supports the Hezbollah and Hamas, it exposes the relative impotence of the Arab governing elites in not helping and supporting popular causes. So that actually gives Iran that populist fervor, which makes the Arab establishment very uncomfortable.
Which comes to an observation I made once before, which is that Israel's not the target of Iran. It's the bait that it uses to attract Arab popular opinion against their own governments, which is why they're a danger in the region. We're going to continue the discussion, take more of your calls, and take a look at a couple extra topics, including Iran, when we come right back. Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm Jim Zogby, joined in the snow by columnist and political analyst Mowahid Shah, who joined us trudging through what has been a record-breaking snowfall in Washington, D.C. We've actually never seen anything like it here.
Unprecedented.
And with the cold and with increased energy use comes, as we will see now and on into the spring, more calls for ending imported oil and finding a new way to provide energy. I showed this last week at the end of the show, but I wanted to get it out earlier in this show so that we'd have a chance to talk about it and I'd get some viewer comments, because this is a hobby horse of mine. There's an environmental argument about the use of fossil fuels. There's also, at this point, a good, interesting fiscal argument to make about the amount of money that America sends overseas as it imports fuel. But the argument gets made a different way. And here is an ad that is being shown on American television and will be being shown even more so as we get into the spring and the Senate takes up a bill on this issue, by T. Boone Pickens, who himself, I should say, is heavily invested in natural gas and wind energy. So there's a little bit of self-serving going on here, but here's the ad that he uses.
Go back to sleep, America. The oil crisis is over. I don't think so. Our economy is bleeding billions for foreign oil, importing nearly 70%, much of it from countries that don't like us. That's billions we should use to create American jobs. We have plenty of American natural gas to power our trucks and bus fleets. It's cheaper, cleaner, abundant, and it's ours. We've had our wake-up call. It's time to act.
Now, the use of the Arabic, the music, the countries that don't like us, and the ominous scenes, military guarding oil wells, etc., bleeding us, etc. 30 years ago, actually almost to this month, you and I wrote a paper called The Other Anti-Semitism, how there were similarities between attacks against Jews and Arabs, the cartoons from pre-Nazi Germany and Tsarist Russia of the fat Jewish banker being compared with the fat oil sheikh, or the Jewish subversive revolutionary anarchist bent on destroying our civilization, now morphed into the Arab or Muslim terrorist. And this ad plays on that theme. It's the same as doing an ad about with the sort of implied Jews owning Hollywood or Jews owning this. And actually, when he makes the argument about countries that don't like us, there's only one country that actually imports or exports oil to America, and that's Saudi Arabia. 15% of our import, or about 7% of our overall use. The other imported oil we get is Canada and Mexico. Those are our two major suppliers. Maybe the only country of the countries that exports oil to America is Venezuela, that don't like us. Saudi Arabia actually likes us a lot. But it plays on that kind of latent anti-Arab thematics. It's very dangerous.
Yes, and I think also it shows the limitations of having a utilitarian approach towards international relations. That when you need someone, you grovel before them, and when you don't need them, you just totally ignore them. I think Obama administration, to its credit, at least is realizing, Obama himself, that this is an interdependent world, and the Western world and the Muslim world are sailing in the same boat, and their destinies are interwoven. And it's not going to be a zero-sum game that the West gains and the Muslim world loses, or the Muslim world gains and the Western world loses. And they are tied together. Therefore, there's a need to find a common ground. And this is basically pure xenophobia. But it's very interesting that this mostly started, I think, after King Faisal imposed the oil embargo in the wake of the Arab-Israeli war of October 73. And after that, he convened the Islamic Conference at Lahore. It really brought that issue into focus. But if you look in the early history, you mentioned the Hollywood also, that I was just seeing, because I was snowbound, I saw some old movies. And if you see the old movies of 40s like Kismet, Ronald Coleman, The Garden of Allah, Marlene Dietrich, and in the silent era, The Sheikh, and The Thief of Baghdad. I think the Muslims were depicted, the Arabs were depicted as very glamorous, dashing people who would sweep women off their feet, and they were very daring and all that. It all changed when the whole issue of the Middle East got politicized.
One of the things that's intrigued me, I did a lot of speaking on this in Europe after Al-Qaeda attacked in Europe a couple of times. And it appeared to me that Europe's attitude toward Muslims is seen through the prism of Islam as a civilization that actually was there in Europe. Turkey on the one side, the empire in the Umayyad Empire in Spain on the other side, and then now a demographic issue. Whereas in America, it's seen through the prism of the Arab-Israeli conflict. I mean, two different perspectives on it, nevertheless now joined as seeing it a threat, and now sort of preying off of it on the energy issue. You can make the argument about energy much simpler. It's better for the environment to use sun or wind if you can, but they choose to make it this way, and disturbing. And I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more. Let me get some callers in here. Let's go to Montana for a call.
Yeah. I'm afraid I'm going to change the subject a little bit, but it's a topic of the Middle East that I think is very important, and that's the fact that Israel is a nuclear power. When Pakistan, India, and Israel became nuclear powers, nobody said anything. As soon as Iran started thinking about it, the whole world is up in arms, especially America, and we're trying to invoke sanctions. We're calling them aggressive, and we're planning some sort of military control over this thing. Isn't this incongruous? Doesn't the Middle East think that they should talk about Israel's atomic power rather than Iran?
They do, and what you have is President Mubarak, who's been calling now for years for a nuclear-free zone in the entire Middle East, but that continues to get sidelined. Nobody wants to talk about it. The U.S. in particular doesn't want to challenge Israel's nuclear capability, and that's a problem. There is clearly a double standard there. We've talked about that many times before, and thank you for raising it again. Let's go to New Mexico for a call. Caller?
Yes, I wanted to comment on your mentioning Sarah Palin's comment about starting a war with Iran.
Yeah.
I believe the public should be awakened to this possibility. One or the other of the parties may well resort to starting a war to stay in power. And that's a very typical response throughout history, particularly when a country has abused their currency as bad as we have. And I suspect that the economy and the dollar is much closer to the brink of collapse.
Let me go to California for a call. Thank you for that. Your observation, California? Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
You know, I don't think it's just the Arab countries that are making money off of oil. It's also the United States. We haven't done anything really to curb our use of fossil fuels. Why?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that Henry Kissinger, when the Arabs were nationalizing, and the Iran started, actually, Iran and Libya were the first two to nationalize, and then the others did, and the barrel went up to $6, $7. He said it was really good because domestic oil prices went up apace. And so nobody ever talks about that, the amount of money made by local oil companies in this, but the target is always the overseas company. And anyway, let me stop there because we're running out of time, but I want to give Mowahid a chance to respond to a little of what he's heard. Thank you for the calls, and thank all of you who are holding. You've made a cold day a little bit warmer. Thanks for joining us.
I think
Mowahid?
during the first Gulf crisis, let us not forget that Kuwait provoked Iraq by overproducing oil, despite Iraqi warnings, and bringing the price of the oil down. And when the American ambassador at that time, April Gillespie, met Saddam, I think it was in July 1990, just a few days before the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait on August 2, 1990, she said that we have no position on inter-Arab disputes, which Saddam construed as a green light. I think your callers have made some good points that it's extremely important that the United States should have a coherent, consistent policy rooted in traditional American values of fairness. And right now, the policy of creating a separate exemption and immunity for Israel is not working. It will not work. Ultimately, today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, this lacuna, this discrepancy within the American political system has to be addressed for the sake of Israel, for the sake of America, and for the sake of global harmony. Otherwise, I think as the movie said, we are on the road to perdition.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Mowahid, and thanks all of you for calling. Listen, the paper that Mowahid and I did 30 years ago called The Other Anti-Semitism is available. If you email me, my email address or the organization address is on the screen, aaiusa.org. I'd be more than happy to send you a copy of it. I want to thank Mowahid for joining me today and thank all of you who called, and I'll see you next week on Viewpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you.